everyone, I am Vibha Chauhan and welcome to Chauhan classes Funda Clear. So today I'm going to explain the 7th chapter of our Class 10th Political Science, and the chapter that we have got for today is Outcomes of Democracy. So outcomes of democracy. Now you know that we have been on a tour of democracy from class 9th. If you have given some specific time to the political science of class 9th and that of class 10th as well, then you would notice that what we have discussed directly or indirectly includes democracy, and we have all discussed everything discussed that we have been in a tour of democracy. We have been discussing everything about democracy. So before winding up that tour of democracy, shouldn't we have a set of questions like what does democracy do? What kind of people citizens can expect from democracy, and does democracy fulfill those expectations? Well, you know what actually we are going to discuss in this chapter is that expectations and the reality. We'll see that what can be the expectations for democracy or from the democracy, and what are the realities in our country and in the world. So what we are going to discuss is that in the field of economical development, in the field of that inequality, social differences, what can be the role of democracy. We will discuss about it. And after reading this chapter, after studying this chapter, you would get a kind of thinking that would be positive but qualified, and that will lead to the challenges of democracy that we will discuss in the next and the last chapter of this book. So what we are going to discuss in this chapter is basically that what can be the outcomes of democracy from the expectations and the reality. Well, most of the content of this chapter we have already discussed in sub chapters of class 9th, or it could be class 10th as well, but you know what, that's how we wind up down those things in the chapter. We will see that in it. The outcomes of democracy we'll see in this chapter. So without further ado, let's start our chapter with our first topic, that is how do we assess democracy's outcomes. So how do we assess democracy's outcomes? Now first let us discuss about how can we assess the democracy's outcome. You know what, that in class 9th we discussed about democracy, the basic definition of democracy, the role of democracy, and all of those things. And we discussed about the chapter 2 as well. And in that chapter of class 9th, in chapter 2 of class 9th, many ideas emerged in our mind, and we thought that democracy is the best option for a country, to run a country, because it provides all the methods to deal with the social differences. It helps to resolve the conflicts between people, and that it makes a very good decision making in a country, and everything we discussed about democracy, different things about democracy, like it secures the right of the citizens, it guarantees the right to the citizens. So we discussed about democracy in class 9th as well, and what we saw was that we discussed about different things and different kind of opinions or different ideas of democracy. But you know what, that in many cases what can be seen is that many people like democracy. They think that it is better than other forms of government like rule of monarchy or dictatorship and all those different types of government, but they are not satisfied by the practical democracy. You know what, that there aren't that much prudential that result of democracies. You know that there are very good principles of democracies. We choose democracies for its moral purpose in many cases, not for its prudential reasons. What happens that people like democracy, the principles of democracy, but in practical there isn't anything like that was in its principle, or in practical life, in ground reality, there isn't anything that we discussed about democracy. So there can be a very large gap in remote areas, a very large difference from the expectations, from the from the principle and the reality in the practical life. So that could be a difference as well, and that is why that even if it is a one problem or two faults, then what we say that we start blaming the form of government. We think that this is not a democracy. You think that democracy is not a good form of government, or you will think that am I living in a democratic country. So these two are the options that can come into your mind. So you can just say that for democracy there can be some fault as well. That there can be different results results in different countries of democracy, like there can be different economical development, achievements and goals of different countries. But can there be anything that we can expect from a democracy from all the countries just because it is a democracy? You know that in our world, in Earth, there are more than 100 countries who are democracy, who are democratic, who run through the democratic form of government. But can we expect a single thing from all the countries just because they are democracy? Well, you know what, that we have to. If democracies give opportunities to the people, then what we should that it is not the responsibility of the democracy to change the situation of the country. There should be the responsibility of the people as well, the citizens as well. You know that democracy give opportunities to all people equally, but the real work for the advancement for any country, for the advantage, to take the advantage of those opportunities have to be done by the citizens. And that's why we can say that we can't just blame the democracy form of government. We have to look at ourselves as well. Are we taking the advantage of those opportunities and the equality that we have been given? So we can just say that is how can we assess the outcomes of democracy. And now we can see through examples as well about different outcomes of democracy. So let's discuss about it with our next topic, that is accountable, responsive and legitimate government. So accountable, responsive and legitimate government. Now there must be some things that we have to expect from a democratic form of government. It is not that if it is just because it is a democracy doesn't mean that we can't expect anything from it. Now what is concerned the most from the democracy from any countries that of citizens, that citizens have the right to choose their own rulers, their representatives, and they have the control over the rulers as well in decision making. So on the basis of this, we can say that in a democracy we can expect that every citizen has the right to vote their representatives, and they should have the responsibility in the decision making as well. So you can say that democracy must be accountable to the people and responsive to the needs of the citizens, to their demands and to their needs of the citizens, we can say. In simple terms, we can say that is what we can expect from a democratic form of government. And after that, you know that there are some people or some critics who say that the democratic form of government is not efficient. There must be some question that is it efficient, or you know that is it efficient or powerful or effective on the government, on the country. The democratic form of government, is it effective, is it efficient? Well, let's discuss about it with other alternatives as well. Well, many critics say that there are many different types of alternatives for the democratic form of government who take less time for the decision making, because they don't have to go with the deliberation of majority in the houses or with the public opinion or the major debate on any policy, and that's why in a short time they can make any decision. But in a democracy, you know that deliberation and negotiation is bound to be taking place, and that's why some delay is bound to take place in a democratic form of government, because in a democracy they have to follow a long list of procedures, a long kind of series of procedures for passing any law to be made as a decision or a policy in our country or in any democratic form of government. So we can just say that it follows a long procedure, and that's why it takes a long time as well. And we can say that is why deliberation of all this majority and negotiation has to take place in democracies. But you know that if there are people who say that in alternatives, what happens that they are more efficient in matters of making decision and implementation on the people. But are those laws effective? You know what, that if we compare the democracies of all over the world or the democratic form of government with other alternatives form of government, then we would see that it is better than all other alternatives, as it is more efficient as well as effective. Now what will happen that it has followed all the norms and procedures, and because it has followed all the procedures and norms, that is why it will be acceptable by the people. So because you know that all the time that has been taken, all the time of cost of time that has been taken by the democracy is perhaps worth it, we can say. But if we talk about other alternative form of government like dictatorship or the monarch rule, then we would see that they are not efficient as well or effective on the people, because they are unacceptable by the people, by the citizens of their own country, as they would not be, obviously they would not be satisfied with those rules, as they are not made by themselves or their representatives. So we can say that people would not be satisfied in the alternative forms of government. But if we talk about the democratic form of government, there is a long procedures and norms that have been followed. There would be major public debates on different issues, and everything would be done in procedures and norms, and that is why it would be acceptable by the citizens of our country of any democracy. So we can expect this in the reality as well. And on the basis of this, we can say that in a democratic form of government, what is important is that free and fair competition in electoral politics. There must be some free and fair elections in any country, in any democracy, and after that there must be debates as well on major policies, and there must be those things. So we can say that this is what we can expect. But if we talk about the results of the democracies, then it is a mixed record of all the results. What we would see that there are elections in every democracy that are held. Even in our country, India, we can see a lot of elections to be held in state assemblies, and after that in Lok Sabha elections and all those things. But a fair and free kind of competition in those elections cannot be seen. Well, not all the opportunities can be given to all the people. Not all the opportunities are given to all the people, and we can't see the free competition in any kind of election in many democracies. Well, there's a lot of corruption as well. If we talk about the corruption, then democracy is no better than the alternative forms of government. It also is in this evil. We can say that democratic form of government is corrupt as well, and you know that there can be you could say that there can be elections, but they can be free and fair electoral politics in a country. That is why we can say that in these matters it is no better than the alternative forms of government. But even if we talk about the alternative forms of government like monarch or the dictatorship, then there isn't any provision or there isn't any evidence that shows that those forms of government are better in these matters. They are also corrupt, they are also not attentive to the people, because you know what, that we have to give attention more and more to the citizens of our country, of any democracy. That must be very low in democracies as well. In democracies, in many cases, it could be seen that they are not being attentive to the people, but it is no better in the alternative forms of government. At least it is better than the alternative forms of government. And you know what, that we have the right to information as well. That is, there is a transparency between the government and the citizens of democracies. Now what happens that as all the decision has to follow all the procedures and norms, and that is why every citizen has the right, she has the right to know everything about that decision, whether it has followed all the procedures or not, whether it is wrong or right. So we can say that there is a transparency. Citizens know all about government, and government know about the citizens as well. But in many cases they can't just have the right information, or the government would not be very attentive to the citizens of democracy. So we can say that in these matters democracy is no better than the other alternative forms of government, but at least it is better than the other alternative forms of government. It is no good, it could be that in average level it is below average level, but it is at least better than the alternative forms of government, and that is why we can say that it is a legitimate government. Our democracy is a limited, all the democracies are legitimate government because they have the transparency in them. Even it is in principle, it can be expected by the people. So we can say that is what is meant by the accountable to the people, responsive to the demands, and legitimate government for the people. Now the next topic that we have got about the expectations from the democracy is economic growth and development. Economic growth and development. Now we have seen that democracy produces a good form of government. So can't we expect from it about the good development as well? Well, we have to, I'm talking about development, that is economical development in any democracy. But evidence shows that there isn't that much fulfillment of this demand or the need of the people by the democratic form of government. Well, in many cases from the researches we can see that from 1950 to 2000, well, if you look at the comparison level about that economical development in the countries in dictatorships and democracies, then dictatorships are have slightly higher economical development in them. So we can say that during these years there has been less economical development in democracies than compared to the dictatorships. Well, in economics we will study that all the economical development matters in many things, not just on democratic form of government. It matters on your relation, your international relations, your priorities for the economical development, and that geographical location as well, and all those things that we will study in economics as well. So we can say that there are many other factors that affect the economical development in a country. But even if we compare different categories of the countries, like very poor countries to the poor countries of dictatorship and democracies, then still there is a fact that is negligible. That is, dictatorships have higher kind of economical development in them. So we can say that in dictatorship countries there has been higher economical development compared to the democratic form of government. But with just one reason, we can't just say we can't just reject the democratic form of government, because it still has a lot of positive outcomes. Other positive outcomes, some of them we discussed as well. So we can say that we can't just neglect the fact that they have other positive outcomes. Well, we can say that all swords have two sides. So it can be good and bad as well. So we can say that if it is bound to have very good results, then it is bound to have bad results as well. So we can say that there is a kind of less economic development in those countries, in democracies, but just not for just one reason. We can't just reject the democratic form of government. Now the next topic that we have got here is economic outcomes of democracy. So economic outcomes of democracy. You know what, that any argument about democracies, about democratic form of government becomes a very passionate argument. Well, it becomes negligible by the people. We can say that it cannot be solved in a simple manner, or that in simple terms or simple manner, and that one of those arguments can be economical development or the economical growth. Now there are many students of democracy who have gathered many resources, many evidences to see the relationship between the economical development and the democracy, and they have found that in many countries what happens that there is less economic development compared to the dictatorships. And the second thing that they saw that through those resources and evidences was that in countries like Brazil or South Africa, what happens that the 20% of the population, the starting top population of the country, takes the 60% of all the wealth of that country, leaving only 3% for the bottom 20%. So we can say that there is a less proportion, unequal proportion of all the wealth distributed among them. And in countries, you could say that in countries like Hungary and Denmark, they are better in this matter. So we can say that Hungary and Denmark, countries like Hungary and Denmark, are much better in these things, in these matters, or in these decisions about distributing the wealth among all the people or all the citizens. Now the next topic that we have got here is reduction of inequality and poverty. So reduction of inequality and poverty. Now as we have just seen that there is a lot of poverty and an unequal distribution of all the wealth among the people, among the citizens of a democracy. Now we can't expect the government, the democratic form of government, that it has to do all the economical development, but we can have demand, or we can expect the reduction of all the economical disparities, all the poverty, the poverty disparities among the people. As we had already studied about economics in class 9th, and we saw that there is a large number of people or population that represents poverty in our country. So we can say that there is a lot of poverty poverty in our country, in India, and that is why we can have a demand, or we can expect the government, the democratic form of government, to reduce all the that economical development or economical disparities among the people. There should be equal distribution of wealth among the people as well. It should not be just in a handful of the people there is a lot of wealth, more than 50%, and that all for the remaining 50% there is a very that little money left. So we can say that for those people who are in large number, there should be large amount for them as well. That in our country, if on the constitutional basis we can have a say that in our country everyone is equal on the basis of elections, only on the basis of elections, on the political arena we are equal on the political arena. We have the right to vote, and there we aren't unequal. But when it comes to economical development, there is a lot of inequality or differences that can be seen among the people. There are many people who are very, very rich, and many people who are kind of very, very poor. So we can say that the gap between the rich and poor has been ever increasing. But just with one fact, we cannot say that we have to reject the democratic form of government. But still, it is becoming a very big problem. There are still many poor countries in our there are many poor countries in the world, like Bangladesh, whose 50% of the whole population has become poor, and there are still many countries who are very, very poor, that they depend on the rich countries even for their food, even for the food supplies. And if we talk about our country, then there are many poor people. There is a lot of poverty, and there is lack of facilities among the poor people. Like if there are children from poor families, what would happen? That they would not have health facilities, their education system, that all that facilities of housing and better care, you could say that raising of all those children. So we can say that is why, because there is a lot of economical disparities among the people. Now the next topic that we have got here is accommodation of social diversity. So accommodation of social diversity. Well, in this book we discussed about social diversity, differences and conflicts that can be dealt with democracy, and this is a plus definite point of democracies or a democratic form of government. Because that we have seen example of Belgium, we saw that there can be with democracy. If there is a democracy, then there could be dealings with social diversity, social conflicts as well. We saw the example of Belgium. We saw that there is a lot of diversity, ethnic diversity, but still they are living an harmonious life. They are leading an harmonious life, and that is what we can expect from a democracy. Well, you can say that democracy let us live a very peaceful life or an harmonious life among all the social groups. But does democracy really let us live a very kind of harmonious life in the social groups? We can say that it helps us to respect all the differences. You cannot say that all the differences can be dealt with democracy. All the differences of the social groups, linguistic diversity of India, and all those things cannot be dealt just with democracy. But we do have them a kind of method by the democracy, that is to respect all the diversities of our country, so that there wouldn't be any kind of conflicts among the people. And if you don't want situations like if that were in Sri Lanka, then there are two main things in our country, in any democracy, that should be followed. That is, first is that democracy does not mean a rule of majority. It does not mean that there is only the opinions of majority people of the population. It means that majority and minority have the options, but don't have the options permanently. Minority should have the right as much as majority of a country. It does not mean that democracy does not mean that only majority have their rights, but the minority don't have. Minority also should have their rights and equality to the majority people and their voice in the decision making in all those decisions. And secondly, most important, that majority does not mean that it is based on religion or caste or that all those things like linguistic matters and caste system and religion matter, those things. That does not mean that majority rule by majority in democracy. But in democracy, rule by majority means that people of different opinions have come together, have formed parties, signs, and that is what we call majorities. And everyone has everyone has the opportunity to form a majority. If they don't have majority by birth, then they can have majority by their and another fields of their life. So we can say that everyone has the opportunity to be in the majority. It does not mean that if you are from this religion then you don't have majority, but you can have a majority in physical appearance or in your studies or in your level of that IQ level or those things. So we can say that there can be opportunities for all the people to accommodate the social diversity, the conflicts, and you could say that all those social differences, diversity, division, and conflicts among the people. That is why there can be tensions among the people, but those tensions cannot become violent or extra violent or kind of repulsive through democracy. Now, next and last topic of this chapter is dignity and freedom of the citizens. So dignity and freedom of the citizens, the most important point or the outcome of democracy, at least in principle it has a kind of accepted this term, you could say. Now dignity and the freedom of the citizens are the most important thing in any democracy. You know what, that all the non-democracies leave this thing behind, and that is why we can say that democratic government, democratic form of government are much better in this form. We can say that everyone, that many citizens think that they are not being respected by the fellow citizens, and often there can be many conflicts among the people just because of this, because they think that they have not been treated well or they have not been respected. And that is why we can say that through a democracy they have their rights as an equal person to every person. They have the right to be respected, and we can say that their dignity has been held up by the democratic form of government, their dignity and freedom, that freedom of liberty, and that liberty, faith, worship, all those liberty, all those freedom we can say. So you can say that is what has been given by the democratic form of government. And after that there can be many things like many practices or many that beliefs of the people that have been subordinated by the people or have been very dominant from a long history. Let's discuss about the gender inequality or the women's struggles. And you know what, that from a long history it has been seen that women aren't that much for work and women cannot prove to be very powerful or those things. But that mindset of the people has been changed by the women's long struggle, their feminist movements, and all those things. So we can say that over a long period of time, over decades ago, that all started. But now there is some sense or sensitivity in the democratic form of government for women as well. It is not that everywhere there is awareness among the people about women. So we can say that, but still they have got into the principle, and in practical it will be sometime. So we can say that is what is meant by the democratic form of government, a very plus different point of the democracies of all over the world. So we can say that the dignity and the freedom that cannot be given to any non-democratic form of government. Even with the monarchy, you don't have your freedom or the dignity, or even in the dictatorships, all those things. So we can say that can be given, that can be a very good benefit from the democracies all over the world. And you know what, that in democracies there is more and more awareness, there can be more and more awareness among the people, like the caste inequalities. Let's take an example of India, the caste inequalities. What happens that now what has been done for the caste inequalities, that either by the principle it has been taken that the caste inequalities should not exist, and that is why much of the caste inequalities has been decreased, has been declined. So we can say that many practices of caste inequalities as well, like the abolition of untouchability, that means a lot of concept of the caste inequality. So we can say that has been changed by the democratic form of government. So we can say that is all we have discussed. Now the most important outcome of the democracy is that now people think that there should be changes, that if something has been given to the people through the democratic form of government, they would want more and want to make the democracy more and more efficient. And that is why we can say that it can be that people's citizens' complaints can never end. They always complain everything about anything, this thing or that thing. So even if we give them that thing facility, after that they would bring a new matter. And that is why when we talk about the definition or the work of democracy, everywhere they would just start complaining about the democracy. But that is a plus point, because now they have become as a subject to an individual citizen through that democratic form of government, because now they have awakened from as a subject to as a citizen. So we can say that from a subject they have become a citizen because they have seen the democratic project has been successful, and we can say that that is an outcome of the people as well, by the people as well. We can count it as an outcome as well. You know what, that many people still who aren't even living in democracies still choose to live in democracy. Why is it so? It can be an outcome of the democracies as well. And you know that still there are many people in the world who think that their vote can change the government, can change the society, or can change the country's political system. So there are many believers of democracies in the world, and that is why there are many plus outcomes, there are many expectations. Well, there can be many expectations that aren't fulfilled in reality, but still democratic form of government is better than any other form of government, as it gives more rights to the people, more things to the people, more benefits to the people. And that is all we have discussed in this chapter. Now, one of the most important things that we have come to an extent is that there can be many other challenges to the democracies as well. So we'll discuss what are the challenges to democracies in the next and last chapter of this book, and this is all we have discussed in this chapter. I have discussed all topics and subtopics, and stay tuned for the upcoming videos. So this is all we have discussed in this chapter. So thank you very much.